Respiration test next week, guys. We are on sections 2.2 and 2.3. Only 2 sections, but there's a lot of information there. Okay. It's going to be about approximately 35 to 40 marks. And that's going to include around 15 multiple choice. And then the rest of the marks are going to be a combination of different things. Okay. Here are the key concepts that you need to know. First off, how many stages of cellular respiration? 4 stages. So 4 stages, and that begins with glycolysis. Next, we have pyruvate. Oxidation. Followed by Krebs cycle.
You better cut me up.
And finally, our good old favorite is?
I say that's all 4.
How about the electron transport chain? So, those are the 4 concepts that are the 4 stages of cellular respiration. Then, we also had in there the controlled metabolism. The related pathways. And also fermentation. So those are all the concepts that we talked about. Now, how do you look at this material? Okay. Important that you know, you do need to know, become with, memorize if you want to use that word, the pathways. Okay? So you need to know the details of all pathways. And that means make sure you know the number of carbons. That's the first way to control stuff. Number of carbons. If you're starting with glucose, that has 6 carbons. You end up with 2 pyruvates. Each one has 3 carbons. Know the reactions. What were some of the reactions that we saw along the way? Silence. Okay. Main reactions were, of course, oxidations. Which molecules were doing oxidations? NAD and FAD, right? Those were the oxidizing molecules, right? We also saw isomerizations, did we not? Often after a reaction, the molecule had to shift its bonds a little bit to become more stable. We had phosphorylations. That's when phosphate is added, right? And then when we made ATP, there were 2 ways that ATP was made. What were the 2 ways that ATP was made? Substrate level, good. Substrate level phosphorylation and oxidative. 2 ways in which we made ATP. Okay. So the phosphorylations were to make ATP. So know the different reactions. Yes, sir.
The one that we did back yesterday, the class before, right? Which one is on oxidation?
Yes. Okay. So oxidations, isomerizations, phosphorylations. Know the number of carbons, okay, and know the names.
Names.
And by names, I mean full names, not the abbreviations. As I indicated, knowing abbreviations is not of much use to you because it's a lot of numbers and letters and just gets all jumbled. If you follow the names and a number of carbons, it's quite easy to remember the pathway because it makes sense. Okay? So please do that. Also, know the energy balance sheet.
Well, she is that.
In other words, the number of ATPs the number of NADHs, and the number of FADH2s, and altogether
Total net.
the total ATP. And you always want to know it per glucose.
Sure.
Yes.
Is this the
Yes. And that has all the
just the front page, right?
That one, yeah. Bobby, you want to get that one over there? That one gives you the total.
Hi everyone on YouTube.
All right. There we
Follow me on Twitter at ChristyRealist.
Okay, good. So that is important, so you need to know that. So what kind of questions might you expect? Let's take a look at that. Question types. For sure, I'm going to ask you to explain at least one of the pathways. So, or describe, explain a pathway. So, for example, I might ask you, give me glycolysis, 10 steps, or Krebs. Show the Krebs cycle. But would you expect me to just say here, regurgitate, throw it down? So then after this, there's always going to be a B part, C part question. And they're going to be more in the form of what ifs.
Shoot, I hate one of
Okay, so what ifs? What if there isn't oxygen present here? What if there is too much ATP? Where might it be inhibited? All right. What if CoA doesn't bring those carbons in? How will that affect the process? Okay. All those kinds of things. What if there isn't enough oxygen present? And then what would that pathway look like? And how can that be corrected? Or some of the questions like we just talked about is, why do athletes not just sit around in an easy chair after a game? Why are they still doing exercise? And what kind of exercise are they doing? Light exercise or heavy exercise? And what's the point of that? How does that relate to lactic acid? And all that sort of thing. Okay? And then the other kind of what ifs you might get are, what if you're not eating just carbohydrates, which is the case? What happens to the other stuff we eat? What happens to all the fats that we eat? What happens to the proteins we eat? Do we get ATP out of those or not? And how might things look different if you shift your diet to more of this versus more of that? Okay. So those are the kinds of thinking questions that come underneath. But make sure you know the details of the pathways and make sure that you know the ATP production along the way. That is key. So you're going to see some questions where I'll simply frame it in a chart. Okay. Here are the different stages. What's the ATP production in each one? Could be something simple as that. That's an easy 4 marks. Or it could be give me the whole Krebs cycle and then explain what's going on. Make sure you know the question that we started off with. Why do we breathe? And now we can answer that question not with a simple answer, because if you don't, you'll die. Okay? So now we know. When we breathe, it's all about getting what to where?
Air to
Gets
the lung.
oxygen to...
The lungs.
The lungs are the thing to get it in and out. Where is that oxygen got to get to? Electron transport chain. Good. And specifically, it's sitting in the matrix of the mitochondria.
Gets O2 to matrix of mitochondria.
Yeah. And oxygen, what's its nickname? It is the what?
The electron teeth.
The electron teeth. Also, that's the Oakwood expression. Also known as the final or terminal electron acceptor. All right. And if oxygen isn't sitting there at the end of the electron transport chain to scoop up those electrons, everything gets backed up all the way back to which molecule?
They call it, I think, I don't know. So, oh, NA.
How about pyruvate?
Pyruvate.
How about pyruvate? We did that 10 minutes ago, people. All right? Pyruvate. And then pyruvate, instead of being further oxidized, gets opposite of oxidized is reduced by NADH into lactic acid or alcoholic carbon dioxide if it's a yeast cell. Okay? All right, guys are still a little bit rusty. You're still not seeing the whole big picture. Okay, so that's key. Why oxygen? And if we don't have oxygen, gentlemen, if we don't have oxygen, what's the problem with that? Okay? Be prepared to answer that question. All right? Why do we breathe? Oxygen and this huge one, oxidation. It's all about oxidation. Because when something is oxidized, what have you taken from it?
Oxygen. I'm joking.
Electrons. And those electrons get taken to the electron transport chain, where we're going to make how many of those 36 ATPs get made at the electron transport chain? 32 of them. The vast, vast majority. And that's because oxidations have collected all these electrons that can be run through the electron transport chain.
Say word.
If you don't have oxidations, you don't have all that ATP.
And if you don't have oxidation, you can't read.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Got it.